In fact, all of our lives, we've been having encounters that have shaped us, that have molded us, sometimes in a good way, and sometimes those encounters that we have maybe don't shape us or mold us in the way that we necessarily wish that it would have. An encounter with the person that became or still is your best friend. I go back and I remember, you guys can all remember that friend that you had in your life, that someone that you just spent life with, and when that encounter just began. And for some of us, that friend is still in our lives. But I would say for all of us, we could look back at that person and just remember those moments and that time that we got to share with them. And it shaped us. Maybe it was a teacher or a coach. Some of you in here were molded and shaped by an encounter with Mrs. Kleinlein. Amen. And that you had some encounters with her too. Some of you got to sing happy birthday. Some of you got to go up and stick your nose in a circle that was drawn in chalk and just stand there. Some of you got to push a pencil down the hallway with your nose. Yep, it did happen. I remember a couple of my good friends. I'll never forget. And it was raining outside, and I had her in second hour, and she'd always left to go check the mail, and I think it was just to leave. You know, because that woman could tiptoe as quiet as anyone I'd ever heard. You couldn't hear her coming from nowhere. She always wore them heels, and you would think, And it was raining that day, and we'll never forget that, I believe it was Tim Lansdowne and Tony Purrier she'd left, and they had their heads out the window, and we're talking to probably a girl. It's raining, and she sneaks all the way up the hall, and she comes in the room, and she's immediately doing this, and you just did not, if she was doing this, you were quiet. And she snuck all the way up to him. And she stuck her head out that window by him and said, "What are you boys looking at?" And they stood there with their heads out that window in the rain for the entire period. Loved her to death. She was great. She molded me and shaped me. I'll tell this one more story on her, and bless her heart, but and I won't tell you who did this. It wasn't me, but somebody brought a little gardener snake into the room and put it in her desk. And they took all the chalk off of the chalkboard, so she'd have to get in her desk with the chalk. And she opened that thing up and never missed a beat. She reached in there and grabbed that thing and just went shwak. And she reached over to the person that she just knew, and she was right. And she said, "Would you go take this outside for me, please?" Walked up, grabbed it, took it outside. Not a word was said. She was great. I loved her. Coach Sylvie, an encounter with Coach Sylvie. I was blessed with great coaches. Coach Sylvie, Coach Doherty, Coach Sawyer, Coach Ewing. These were men that invested in me and taught me more than the games that they were being paid to coach. And I still, Coach Doherty, of course, has passed, but I have all my coaches. And I still call them coach to this day. I don't call them by their first name, and I get to, see them on a regular basis, and that's just who they are. That's the type of encounter that they had in my life. And maybe you all can relate to an encounter with someone as well. Maybe it's the encounter with your spouse. I remember my first encounter with Lacey, and it was long before we got together. But I remember those moments. Parents, you remember the first time you encountered your children? That very first moment. And it changed you, didn't it? That encounter, it's just instantaneously. And if it was your first child, you guys can probably remember everybody saying, "Oh, it's just going to change your life. It's just going to change your life. I can't tell you how. It's just going to change your life." And just like that, in that moment, and it's just life-changing. That encounter. Anyone remember their first encounter with the law? I do. Every bit of it. It was a part of life. And even those moments, and there haven't been many, it just happens to be that they were all significant. Just being real. still changed me. This morning here in church, or maybe before church this morning, or you've had an encounter already. Maybe that encounter included a hi or a hug, a handshake from someone. Maybe that encounter this morning was with a child who was a little unruly and didn't really want to wear the shoes that you'd picked out and ended up wearing mismatched socks and shoes, and they're on the wrong feet, and you just finally threw your hands up and said, forget it. Maybe that encounter made you smile, and maybe that encounter frustrated you to the point that maybe you just were like, you know what? I don't even want to go. But we've all had an encounter of some kind this morning. Here's another reality. The encounters that we have not only affect us, they will affect someone else. And most of the time we don't think about whether we are levitating someone or limiting someone when we come in contact with them, or who might be levitating or limiting us, who might be, building us up, or who might be holding us down, or sometimes even tearing us down. Think about the disciples. Think about the very first time that Jesus encountered them. And if you go back to that moment when Jesus was just kind of first coming on the scene as an adult, about to start his ministry, and he walks up to Peter. And in that moment, that instantaneous moment, you just have to believe that Peter had no concept of what was about to happen, had no idea about how much his life was to change. But in that moment of that encounter, it changed him forever and ultimately changed us as well. All from that one encounter, that one moment that began something incredible. There was a lot of stories in the Gospels especially where, talk about encounters. Let's look at Paul just really quickly on the road to Damascus. That his encounter with Jesus in that moment changed him from a persecutor of Christians to one who battled daily to see more and more people follow Christ. Gave his life for it, all because of that encounter. And we could read about several encounters. I'm going to talk about specifically one this morning in the scriptures that's talked about in Matthew chapter 17. And we're going to go through a few verses and just kind of look at them and see how they speak to us about the importance of this encounter. In verse 1 it says, after 6 days Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. This morning's message is a message of questions. You guys that know me know that I like to ask questions, because when you ask a question, at the very least, it causes you to begin to try to think of a response, an answer. So here's the first one. Where's Jesus taking you? I want you to look inside of your own life, just you as an individual, kind of, not necessarily your spouse or your family as a whole, because this is something about, encountering Jesus. Yeah, we want to do it as a family. We want to do it as a church, but the encounters with Christ really begin with us as individuals. So the questions are really specifically driven towards you. Where is Jesus taking you? Where's he taking you in your life? These guys were a part of the 12. They were different. Peter, this guy, was bold, usually the first to react, never hesitated. He jumped out of the boat to walk on water the moment that Jesus said, come to me. He jumped in and cut off the ear of a soldier that came to get Jesus. He reacted quickly. But he was human, just like you and I. But the one thing about Peter, especially in this moment, is Peter was willing to be led. Peter was not perfect, and Peter made mistakes. He made mistakes before this encounter that we're about to read about, and he definitely made mistakes after the fact. But we know by this that he was willing to be led. James and John, sons of thunder, sounds more like a WWE tag team. But you just think about that. I always like that, sons of thunder. And these three guys, Jesus says, hey, let's go up a mountain. And they were willing to go. They were willing to say yes in this moment, had no idea where Jesus was taking them, and probably were a little bit excited, but also a little bit scared about what was going to happen. Because they'd already seen some really cool stuff, and probably some would classify some really strange stuff. Stuff that they had never seen before, never experienced before. And here's Jesus, and he just calls three of them. He says, hey, why don't you guys come with me? Let's go up this mountain. Let's just make this journey. They were willing to be led. They were willing to step out on a limb and do something different. They were willing to trust Jesus to lead them wherever he chose, not necessarily wherever we want to go. Remember, these three were the first ones Jesus went to and said, leave everything and follow me, and they did. They did. They said yes. Willing to be led. Are you willing to be led by Jesus today? Are you willing to go where he wants to send you? You know, this whole series that we're in right now, Just Be Real, I told you it's right off the bat, this was going to be as simple one-on-one as it gets. Because sometimes we just make things so complicated in our life, especially our life with Christ. We try to, and listen, there's nothing wrong with trying to really dig in and to grow and go deep and all that. Go as deep as you possibly can with Christ. Just don't lose sight of the simplicity of what this is all about. Don't make it something that it's not. And I can tell you today that one of the greatest things that will ever happen in your life is when you allow yourself to be led to an encounter with Jesus. I spent most of the morning in here this morning. I was a little bit rattled because I'm a little out of sorts. And, you know, I have a routine, and my routine was kind of shaking a little bit today. So I was doing a few different things. But I stopped in the middle of it because I felt myself getting just a little bit frustrated. And so I stopped back there. I put some worship music on, and I began to look back. Now, you've heard me say before, our past is not to be lived in but learned from. And I begin to think of Pastor Buddy over at the assembly and our friendship and our ministry together and all the places that we got to go to and all the amazing worship experiences and encounters that we were a part of. And I begin to remember some of them specifically, those encounters. When Jesus encountered me and him and maybe us together, but when we were a part of, you know, being able to help others encounter, I was just going back and reflecting on them, and those were awesome. I'd love to go back there every once in a while. But Jesus doesn't let us stay there. Because I believe he's always just kind of speaking, okay, that was great, and we're gonna look at this here in just a little bit. But I've got something new and exciting. And I believe in this moment, this is exactly, and without telling the disciples what was going on, he just said, come on, let's go up this mountain, let's do it. And they said, yes. My second question today is, what is Jesus showing you? Let's look at verse 2 through 6. There he was, now when they got up to the mountain, top of the mountain, there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. That had to be a little weird. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Verse 5 says, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. That's pretty specific. And then in verse 6, when the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. Sometimes in life we have questions. Sometimes in life we have doubts, something we want answers to. And in that day, Jesus was questionable to say the least. Last week we talked about Jesus being controversial. Prophets talked about the Messiah coming. For hundreds of years, prophets had spoken about this Messiah, this King, this Lord that was going to show up on the scene and change things. But the law was still the law, and it was so strict during this time. You had to take so many steps on Sunday, but no more. Only eat certain foods, do certain things. People lived in a world of legalism, and people still today get so caught up in the do's and the don'ts and what's right and what's wrong. And don't get me wrong, we should follow the do's and the don'ts and the rights and the wrongs of what God's Word says. But when the do's and the don'ts and the rights and the wrongs become more important than the relationship with Jesus, then we have got things completely wrong. Wrong. We're to grow, we're to get better, we're to become better Christians, we're to become more like Jesus. But when that becomes the most important thing, what is Jesus showing you? So I'm sure Peter and James and John had a lot of questions. You take them up this mountain, who is this man, what is he doing? And But remember, they were human just like us. Maybe you haven't met Jesus yet and you have questions. Maybe you just met him and you have questions. How many of us have been following Jesus for a long time and you got questions? We just questions and things that in our lives, and we're just like, really, God? I don't see that one. I didn't see that one coming. And we have questions. And we pray for Jesus to show us the answer on some billboard or some message in a cloud. And this is exactly what happened on this mountain. This could not have been any more of a bright billboard moment. I mean, all of this stuff that the disciples have seen, all of the questions that they probably had, all of this amazing stuff, and they gotta be, is this guy really real? What is going on? Is this too good to be true? And here these three guys are standing on this mountain. The glory of Jesus himself just illuminates everything. Moses and Elijah, two dead guys, show up. And then they hear the voice of God say, that's my boy. Just do what he says. It doesn't get any more real than that. It doesn't get any more, I'm showing you everything right now than that. God speaks. And at that moment, any doubts that they may have had, any questions that they may have had about Jesus, that's about as definitive an answer as you could get. It was clear. And they had an encounter with Jesus that would change them forever. And they would never forget it. In fact, that encounter very well could have been what pushed them the rest of their lives to make a contact, to share a message about Christ with someone else. I mean, I know there was others. I get it. Seeing people healed and, walking on water and, all of this just amazing stuff that they got to be a part of. But in this moment, there was no more questions. He was real. Matthew 17:7. But Jesus came and touched them. He said, get up. Don't be afraid. You remember in our scripture, everything was great, and Peter was like, yeah, let's stay. And then God spoke, and they're like, oh my goodness. And they knelt, and they were afraid. Just like fear consumed them. Fear took over their lives, and Jesus said, get up, don't be afraid. So my next question to you is, what are you afraid of? Literally, what are you afraid of? When God comes down and encounters you like that, when you have an encounter with Jesus like that, and come on, I'm not saying that everyone in this room has had that. If you have it, you need to earnestly seek that encounter. But for those of you that have had that encounter, and I'm one of them, it's just like, oh my goodness, this is awesome. And then we allow fear to take over. Well, what am I going to do? God, I know you've spoke. I know you've moved. I know you've done this, but this has happened. And fear comes in. God speaks. He says, I want you to do this. And you're just like, oh man, I can't do that. And fear takes over. What is that thing in your life right now that you just don't know about? You just got this question that's keeping you from that. That place you just don't know where God is sending you. That thing that God may be trying to do in your life or speak into your life. A relationship. Next week, we're going to talk about we're going to talk about family, actually. Relationships in family. We're going to talk about marriage. We're going to talk about kids. We haven't done that in a while. I feel it's important, so that's where we're going. Maybe God's been speaking something to you as a husband or a wife or a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or whatever. And God's been speaking something to you, to help you grow. Men, I'm coming after you next week. Just prepare yourself right now. Don't let that, don't cower in fear like what God. You get back here because I'm coming after you next week. I'm going to be really, 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 really real. And it's not all towards you, wives. I'm coming at you too, parents. I'm coming. That's just where we're going. God's going to speak, okay? And maybe God has been speaking something to you for a long time about changing something or doing something different. And maybe, the whole intention of this encounter with Jesus is like, I just want to make you a better husband. I just want to make you a better wife. I just want to make you a better, a better parent or whatever it may be. And it's just like, oh man, I'm afraid of that. Never done that before. Never led my family that way before. Maybe it's a job change. I've been through that a couple times. That's scary. God says, just do what Jesus says. Just do what he says. Boy, don't you wish it was that easy? Don't you wish it was just that easy? You hear him say it, go, okay, you said it, I'm doing it. And that's the intention. That's what he wants us to do, how he wants us to be. But it's just not that easy. Because there's uncertainty. And again, just like the disciples, after God speaks it and they cower in fear, fear takes over, this big life change. Maybe Jesus is just really speaking something. Maybe you've had that encounter and it's just like, oh, what's the thing you're just waiting for God to show you? What's that thing in your life right now that you've just been praying? God, take me up on a mountain right now and show me that, and I'm good. And I'm good. I'll do it. And you know what? I believe God still does that with Christ sometimes. But sometimes it's just about the faith. Sometimes it's just about the step. Because you know the crazy thing is, we ask God for this big billboard, and you know what? Sometimes he shows us what should be enough to give us the faith needed to push us forward, but then we cower in fear. And we're afraid anyways, afraid to make the steps that God's asking us to make, even when we know God spoke. See, when Peter and the guys fell down afraid, Jesus reached down and says, get up. You've just seen who I am. You've heard God himself tell you who I am. Get up. Don't be afraid. Guys, we come to church every Sunday morning. And we stand and we shout and hoorah our faith. We see God moving in somebody else's life. And we're just like, yeah. But the moment God speaks to me, the moment God speaks to you, it's just like, oh, God, I don't know. I don't know. What are you afraid of? What's that thing that you're afraid of? Don't be afraid. Remember when you first got your driver's license? I've been reflecting a lot with this one. You remember when you first got that driver's license? You're scared to death, wasn't you? I was. I didn't act like it. I thought I had it all under control. All my kids thought they had it under control. I don't need to study for that thing. My twins were the first ones to pass it, I think, the first time. I don't think the rest of I think that, well, maybe I need to study just a little bit, but I remember my excitement. I remember, the excitement and the fear of my kids. And I remember back then, you took your test on a Thursday, and so, I took my test, and it was great. And I remember pulling away for the first time thinking, this is amazing. Right? You had control. You had freedom. It's just like, oh my goodness. The first day went well. The second day was, met a deal on a road, a truck and something, and Timmy was with me. And it was day 2. Rolled that baby 4 times. But there was still this sense of freedom after that. Think about that. I remember watching every one of my kids drive away for the first time. Got a license, the keys to freedom. I kind of reference that towards how God does this with us. He gives us a license and these keys to freedom. He says, get up, don't be afraid, you can do this. I've shown you who I am, now get up and do it. And that leads me to my last question this morning. And it's, where's Jesus sending you? Where's Jesus sending you? See, these guys could have stayed up on that mountain, and actually they wanted to. Remember, Peter said, hey, and this is awesome. Let me build some shelters here. One for Moses, one for Elijah, one for Jesus. Hey, you guys have the shelter. This is so awesome. We're just going to hang out here, kind of off to the side, and we're just going to be a part of this. This is amazing. Let's just stay right here in this encounter. And if we were honest, just me this morning reflecting, going back, I can tell you, I could go boom, boom, boom. I could start rattling off encounters that I've had with Jesus that I honestly would say, gosh, could I just go back there? Could I just go back there and stay in that one? I can remember many nights not even wanting to go home. God just moving, and he just kept moving, and he just kept moving. And you're just like, can we just stay? Can life just be like this? You just think, God, can life just be like this, God? I mean, it's great. You're speaking to me. I hear you. I see you. Can it just be like this? Can we just stay here, please? But staying up there wasn't the plan. See, I don't believe Jesus took those disciples up there just to reveal who he was. I believe Jesus specifically took them up on that mountain so he could turn around and send them back down. And the encounter with Jesus, what he gave them on that mountain was enough to send them back down. They had all they needed at that point to go back. Now, I think purposely Jesus takes us on those mountains. He gives us those experiences on purpose. And man, I would love to stay in them. But those encounters and those experiences are for him to send us to that next place. See, that encounter was life-changing. I believe this today. We may not be on no mountaintop, but I believe that you're in a place where you can encounter Christ in the very same way. But that's up to you. We'd love to stay in moments, but that's not where we're to stay. There are broken people, hurting people. They need an encounter. And they need you to help lead them to that encounter. Places where Jesus will send you specifically. Where's he sending you? Where's he been wanting to send you? Because I can promise you, Jesus is not just standing by watching us let fear keep us from moving forward. He has something for all of us to do. Why else would he desire an encounter with us in the first place? Get up and go. Yes, it may be scary. Yes, it may be completely out of your comfort zone. But he is who he says he is, and he will do what he says he will do. When Peter went back down that hill, see, this is the thing, too. Isn't it crazy? God will have those, he'll give us those moments, he'll give us those encounters, gives us everything that we need, he'll speak whatever we need. I mean, all the faith should come from that encounter. Everything right there should just boom. And Peter still walked down that mountain, and a short time later, he denied Christ 3 times. It's fear. It's fear. He had to go down supercharged, but then we come back and we get into life and things happen, right? Things just happen. He knew who Jesus was. He'd heard God speak, but he still had a moment. And it wasn't because Jesus had changed. It was because of fear, because we allow it to limit us instead of Jesus levitating us. In Psalms chapter 23, verse 4, it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. See, the writer here wasn't afraid because he knew Jesus was with him. Not saying that things in life don't happen. Not saying at all that sometimes the things of God aren't a little scary. Because they are. But when you encounter Christ, it doesn't matter what you're facing. It doesn't matter if you're on the mountain, headed up it, going down it, or in a valley. When you have an encounter with Jesus, you're changed forever. Encounters change us. Encounters change us. And our encounters with others can help them as well. What effects are you having on people around you? What effects are you having on the people in the places where God is sending you? What effect is Jesus having on you? Are you cowering in fear? Are you willing to be led? Do you have the same desire to go back down the mountain as you did to go up it? I mean, think about that for a second. Do we have the same desire to go down the mountain and get back in the stuff and of life and all of this stuff as we do to say, if Jesus said, hey, after you've been on a mountain, when Jesus comes back and said, let's go to the mountain, you're like, oh, thank you, Lord. But it's a little harder to come back down sometimes. To have that same passion. To get back after it, to say, okay, God, let's go wherever you want to lead me. Some of you may need an encounter for the very first time. Some of you may be hurting and maybe you're just afraid. Maybe some of you have been praying for a billboard moment for a long time. And if a billboard moment is what you desire, I can promise you this: you won't ever get it without first being willing to follow Jesus wherever he leads. If you're looking for that moment, that life-changing okay, and if the worship team would come up, that would be great. That'd be fantastic. Man, because I want to have an encounter of just a moment with Jesus. But you'll never have that moment if you're not first willing to allow yourself to be led by him wherever he wants to take you. You got to be willing to be led. You got to be willing to face your fears. And then you got to be willing to be sent. Peter, James, and John would have never had that encounter had they not first been willing to go up that mountain. Are you willing to be led? Where's Jesus been wanting to take you? What's he showing you? And where's he sending you?